Hello everyone, I just want to welcome everyone to coming to the American Medical Association National Conference. This year we're held in Washington, D.C. I want to thank the Convention Center here for hosting us. And just a reminder, today's policy meeting is on the American Medical Association and specifically our ethics branch. And today we'll be talking about euthanasia. Before we go any further, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Euthanasia. I'm currently the U.S. Surgeon General of the United States. It's been a couple of years for me. First, Obama suggested me in 2013. Took about 15 months later until Senate approved me. They voted me in, and by a wide margin in December 2014. I've been happily serving in that role ever since. A little bit more about myself. I founded Doctors for America. Doctors for America. This is an organization that supports healthcare reform in the country. And a little bit more about myself. I did my undergraduate at Harvard. I started at Yale Medical. After that, I did my residency and as well at Brigham and Women's in Boston. I'm really thrilled to be here to serve. I'm also a member of the American Medical Association, so to be a panelist or a moderator for this panel has been really an honor. For our panel today, I just want to go over the rules. I'm going to ask each of our panelists 3 questions. They're each going to be given a 1-minute answer. And then after that, we're going to hold audience participation until the end. And I just ask that no one interrupt whoever's speaking, whether that be myself, the panelists, or anyone in the audience. And so a little bit today, the purpose of the panel today is to debate euthanasia as a medical option in treating terminal illness in the United States. And I'm really excited about this panel, and without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists now. First, we have Dr. Jacoborkian. Dr. Jacoborkian did his research and studying at University of Michigan Medical, and after he founded a clinic called the Mercy Clinic in Detroit, Michigan, where he specialized in euthanasia and assisted suicide in patients. Dr. Kevorkian has assisted over 130 patients with assisted suicide and euthanasia, including in 1998, he did a live euthanasia treatment on 60 Minutes, which was a national topic at that time. Next we have Professor Christian Mejia. He's a professor at Harvard Law, where his focus is in medical ethics. He's also a member of the American Medical Association Ethics Board, so we're really happy to have him here. He's going to be kind of talking about the financial and judicial aspects of this topic. And then our third is actually just a parent, Julissa Flores. Julissa Flores is the parent of Jane Doe, who at 18 passed last year. She had a terminal illness of cancer. She was fighting for 3 years. And so we brought her onto this panel to kind of talk about the personal aspect of euthanasia and that kind of consideration. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first question. Our first question for today is, should medically assisted suicide be legal? We're going to go ahead and start with Dr. Jacoborkian. Dr. Jacoborkian, a minute to you.
I'm Dr. Jacoborkian, and yes, I believe euthanasia should be legal. According to Dartmouth Atlas of Healthcare, more than 80% of patients with chronic diseases, they want to avoid hospitalization and intensive care when they're dying. This means that family anxiety would be induced, patient anxiety would be reduced. There'd be no religious or state opposition on the personal matter of the patient. And if normal life was virtually impossible to live for a patient who is bedridden, then this is why euthanasia would be a good option. I performed this procedure on over 130 people, and I've been convicted in chasing my efforts. My first patient, Thomas Uke, on 60 Minutes, he was suffering from Lou Gehrig's disease, and I fulfilled his treatment because all other medical alternatives have been exhausted. I believe he held the right to end his own life, as common law allows normal citizens to sustain the right to refuse life-saving treatments. Humans have personal autonomy, and we should not get to the point where litigation happens at our deathbeds. Euthanasia should become legal.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Kevorkian. Next, we have the professor from Harvard, Christian Mejia. 1 minute to you, sir.
My name is Christian Mejia, and I believe that euthanasia should not be legalized. Euthanasia should not be legalized because it's not a fundamental liberty protected by the Due Process Clause. In the 1997 Supreme Court case of Washington versus Glucksberg, Dr. Harold Glucksberg, along with 4 other physicians, 3 terminally ill patients, and Compassion in Dying, which is a nonprofit company or a nonprofit corporation that counsels the suicidal, challenged the Washington ban on physician-assisted suicide. The court followed the historical proceedings of the Anglo-American common law in which assisted suicide was punished or disapproved of for over 700 years. And the Supreme Court unanimously held the decision that a right to assisted suicide was not protected by the Due Process Clause, and I stand by the court's decision.
Thank you very much, Professor. Next, we're going to pass the question on to our parent, Julissa Flores. Julissa Flores, 1 minute to you. Should medically assisted suicide be legal?
Yes, my name is Julissa Flores, and I do believe that medically assisted suicide should be legal because my Jane Doe and many other terminally ill patients have suffered for long periods of time without relief. The term euthanasia itself, according to MedicineNet, is derived from the Greek meaning of good death, and it should not be associated with words like murder. If there is no present cure or medicine that can successfully alleviate the discomfort that patients are experiencing, and both the parents and the guardian and doctors agree to the procedure, then there should be no reason to prolong the suffering of the patients. No one should be subjected to the pain like my daughter was. So I do believe that medically assisted suicide should be legalized.
Thank you very much, Lisa Flores. Next, we're going to move on to our second question, again, 1 minute each. If euthanasia is legalized, can it be safeguarded? Here, we're kind of interested in a slippery slope kind of situation. Dr. Kevorkian, 1 minute to you.
I believe yes, in a workable system, a patient would only choose this option once all treatment was exhausted. A hospice could no longer care for them, and a patient still requested self-assisted suicide. A physician with outside opinion, such as myself, will then be permitted to give the patient the drug in order to hasten their time of death. Small numbers of countries and state regulations already exist, and examples of these places are the Netherlands, and even in the United States, Oregon, Washington, Montana, including Vermont, per News Health Guide, already have these regulations in place, and they could be placed all over the United States. They are as follows: explicit consent by patient, mandatory reporting of cases of euthanasia done, administration only by certified physicians such as myself, consultation by a second physician to make sure they're in good mental health, and a 15-day waiting period between request and prescription of death. This indicates that it will allow them to make sure that they want the death, and this would allow euthanasia to be monitored properly.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your opinion, Dr. Kevorkian. Next, we're going to pass it on to our professor. Professor, 1 minute to you. If euthanasia is legalized, can it be safeguarded?
No, I don't believe euthanasia can be safeguarded because there's already present evidence that it cannot be controlled here in the United States. On October 27th, 1997, the Death with Dignity Act was enacted in Oregon, which allowed Oregon residents to be prescribed medically assisted suicide. In Oregon, we can already see the effects of the slippery slope, which resulted in doctor shopping. Doctor shopping is when patients or people take patients to doctors until they get the prescribed treatment that they wish to acquire. Here, that would be euthanasia, so you'd be ending a life because of doctor shopping. Euthanasia is supposed to be for terminally ill, but there are already Oregon state-issued reports that indicate patients with diabetes and hepatitis have both received a prescription for medically assisted suicide. If legalized on a federal level, the consequences will inevitably spread.
Thank you very much, Professor. And now back to the parent, Lisa Flores. If euthanasia is legalized, can it be safeguarded? 1 minute to you.
Euthanasia can be safeguarded. The regulation and restriction of euthanasia would be left up to the government. The state government would have to have requirements that a patient would fulfill to be eligible for the procedure, and facilities to provide this treatment. For example, Oregon's state legislation requires that the patient must be at least 18 and a resident of Oregon, and make 2 requests to die within 2 weeks. Time also says that 2 doctors must also agree to the procedure, and the patient would have to have no more than 6 months left to live, and he is not suffering from any mental illnesses, including depression. Many patients that are suffering from terminally illness or otherwise realize that medically assisted suicide is a very serious matter, and that life should not be taken for granted. If euthanasia cannot be controlled, the fault lies with the government and medicinal regulations.
Great. Thank you very much to our parent, Lisa Flores, on the panel. Now we're going to go to our third and final question. We're going to give you all still 1 minute to answer. The question is, can we consider euthanasia strictly from a financial standpoint? Dr. Kevorkian, give me 1 minute to you.
Yes, I believe we can consider euthanasia from a financial standpoint. Euthanasia would be cheaper. It's been proven that drugs for assisted living are about $50 to $55, as stated on ABC News, making it far less expensive than medical treatment. Due to healthcare allocation, shortages of beds and nursing staffs, as well as cuts to hospital budgets, this indicates that it would lead to making euthanasia an option. Researchers estimate that by opting for funds, people would forego, on average, 4 weeks of life. It costs about $100,000 a day to stay in the ICU for a terminally ill patient. Over a month, this would add to more than $200,000, inevitably saving more than billions per year. Processes can be put in place where euthanasia is already included in your death insurance. insurance or your life insurance. It can be paid for when required. It would not be a huge burden on your family members, especially when they have to pay for your increasing debt or for your funeral expenses. Again, I'm pro-euthanasia and I'm Jack Kevorkian.
Thank you, Dr. Kevorkian. Next up, again, we're going to go back to the professor. Professor, what do you think? Can we consider euthanasia strictly from a financial standpoint?
It is entirely possible for people to look at euthanasia from a financial standpoint, but no matter how cheap the drug is compared to medical expenses, it's not ethical to put a price tag on life. This is because it allows insurers to abuse the elderly, disabled, and the poor by pressuring them into medically assisted suicide. For example, a publication found on the National Right to Life Committee website states that in 2008, Barbara Wagner, who was an Oregon resident, was seeking cancer treatment from her state health care plan, and instead of receiving treatment, the Department of Health sent her a letter telling her that her plan would not be able to cover the cancer drug she needed. Instead, they reminded her that she had the option to choose medically assisted suicide, for which the department would completely cover. Ethically, it is immoral for the state government to promote medically assisted suicide to those who cannot afford the treatment. Once again, I'm Cristian Mejia, and I'm against the legalization of euthanasia.
Thank you, Professor Mejia. That's a great response, and now we're going to finish the questions off with, by me with Julissa Flores. It's going to be 1 minute to you.
So I agree with Dr. Mejia that the price of life is not something that can be measured by the worth of a dollar. However, if euthanasia is to be looked at from a financial standpoint, then it is worth noting that according to CBS News, Medicare paid $50 billion just for doctor and hospital bills during the last 2 months of a patient's life. That is more than the budget of the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Education. It has also been estimated that 20 to 30% of these medical expenditures have no meaningful impact in the prolonging of the patient's life. If these prices are to be compared, then the $55 that Dr. Kevorkian mentioned is extremely cheaper. I am Julissa Flores, and I am for the legalization of euthanasia.
Thank you very much, Parent Flores. So again, to sum up our panelists and their opinions, first we had Dr. Kevorkian, who's an adamant proponent of euthanasia, and he kind of provided the medical opinion for today's panel. Next was Professor Mejia of Harvard Law. He kind of argued against euthanasia, citing the judicial and legal perspective necessary to consider this. And then we had the parent, Julissa Flores, who had to deal with, she's a proponent of euthanasia after the challenging period. She's experienced the death of her terminally ill child after fighting the illness for 3 years. I want to thank our panelists for being up here and talking, as well as the audience for being so polite during the questions from myself to the panel. I'm not going to open it up to discussion from the audience. So if anyone from the American Medical Association has a question in regards to this panel, I think we have time for about 2 questions. Anyone have a question?
I have a quick question. So I'm not entirely sure exactly what procedures would be enacted with euthanasia. So my question would be more like, what does euthanasia look like, and how does it differ from death row inmates and state penitentiary execution?
So this is a great question. We want to differ the difference between euthanasia and state penitentiary execution. So what does euthanasia look like? How does it differ from state row inmates and the state penitentiary execution? I think this is a question best answered for Dr. Kevorkian. I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer that.
Yes, well, euthanasia usually is done inside, most likely, a room, and it's a chosen type of treatment that these patients go through. So it's usually a humane way, mostly a shot through a straight needle or pills. A main kind of medicine that is used is pentobarbital. It's a barbiturate, and it's basically a central nervous system depressant, and it causes a coma leading to respiratory failure for the euthanasia patient. Compared to inmates who are on death row, they're automatically defaulted to lethal injections, or in some states, such as Utah, they can even be opted for firing squad, or in Tennessee, they can even be opted for electric chair. So these are basically more inhumane options that they do not choose, the government chooses for them. Euthanasia patients, it's a more humane way, and it's more of a procedure than basically a death row type of procedure. But yes, that's the difference between euthanasia patients and someone who's on death row.
Thanks for the response. I think we have time for about 1 more question. Can I see another question from the audience? Yes, sir.
If euthanasia is allowed on a state-by-state basis, how do you envision that process occurring?
Okay, that's a great question. I think we're going to go ahead and set this up for the parent Julissa Flores on the panel. So again, the question was, if euthanasia is allowed on a state-by-state basis, how do you envision that practice or process occurring?
So that's a great question. obviously, the process of euthanasia would differ between state by state, mostly because they would have different regulations and restrictions for it. But mainly what would happen was that either the hospital would have to create separate facilities for the treatment, or they would have to adjust what they have at the moment. And another option that would be available would be that the patients could choose where they would like to die, like Dr. Kevorkian said. They could die in the comfort of their home, or if among their loved ones. It would all be up to the hospital if they would like to perform these special accommodations. But the comfort of the patient is what's most important in this procedure, so that is what should be considered. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Lisa Flores. Again, my name is Vivek Murthy. I'm the U.S. Surgeon General. I'm honored to be hosting this panel. Thank you all for listening, and hope you have a great day.